What if the laws you thought you knew weren't quite what they seemed? What if there was a hidden system working just beneath the surface, designed to change, well, everything? Today, we're diving into a really provocative theory from one author who believes he's uncovered exactly that, a hidden system right inside biblical law. It's a pretty challenging question, isn't it? But it really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. Can a system of law, especially a religious one, have some kind of deception built right into it? That's the controversial idea we're about to unpack. And this is the claim that kicks the whole thing off. It comes from an author named Yaakov. He's basically saying that when he looked closely, he found that many biblical commandments, these laws that are seen as sacred and permanent, actually contain a kind of trick that makes them void. It's a huge assertion, so let's see how he tries to back it up. Okay, so first up, let's tackle the author's central claim. He argues that some of the most basic laws in the Bible weren't just misinterpreted over the years. He's saying they were actually intentionally designed to be canceled out. Let's look at his core thesis. So here it is. Yaakov claims he's found what he calls a sophisticated system of fraud inside of rabbinic Judaism, which, is the mainstream form of Judaism practiced today. He argues this system was specifically created to systematically nullify the laws as they were originally written down in the Torah itself. So, if a system like this really exists, how would it even work? Well, the author points to one specific thing he calls the mechanism, the oral law. So let's just quickly clarify what that is. So, the oral law, traditionally, it's this huge collection of interpretations and rulings from rabbis, passed down over centuries. It's supposed to explain how you actually apply the laws from the written Torah to everyday life. But, according to the author we're looking at, it's actually doing something very, very different. And this really lays out the core conflict in his argument. On one side, you have the written law, the original divine text, and on the other, you have the oral law. He argues that this isn't a helpful supplement at all, but instead an interpretation from later sages that was designed to actively subvert that original text. All right, so we have the thesis and the alleged mechanism. Now let's get into the specific evidence the author brings to the table. He starts with two of the biggest, most fundamental concepts in Judaism, the calendar and the Sabbath. His first major piece of evidence is the calendar. He claims the Torah originally required a solar calendar, but that the sages swapped it out for a Babylonian lunar-based one. Now, the implication of this is just huge, because if the calendar is wrong, then every single holiday is being celebrated on the wrong day, which in his view makes the observance totally invalid. And if changing the whole calendar wasn't a big enough claim, the author then moves on to the Sabbath itself. He's not just saying it's being observed incorrectly, he's arguing it is being actively desecrated, and that this is all part of the design. Okay, so here's his logic. He claims the Torah says a day begins in the morning, but rabbinic law shifts the start of the day to the evening before. Now, this creates a massive contradiction. Think about the Havdalah candle. That's the candle you light on Saturday night to mark the end of the Sabbath. Well, according to the author's timeline, Saturday night is still technically part of the Sabbath. And since lighting a fire on the Sabbath is forbidden, he argues this ritual actually forces people to desecrate the very day they're trying to honor. The argument doesn't stop with these huge ideas like time and the Sabbath. The author then points to a whole series of everyday commandments to try and show just how systematic he believes his whole pattern is. He then gives a whole list of other examples. So take the mezuzah. He says the command to write on the doorposts themselves was changed to writing on a piece of parchment and just putting it in a case. Or the tzitzit, the ritual fringes. He claims the required blue thread was deliberately made to seem like it was impossible to get. He argues grace after meals was limited to only meals with bread, which shrinks its scope. That returning lost items was made harder by adding new rules. And famously, that the law of an eye for an eye was basically nullified by just turning it into a monetary payment. The author also points to what he calls legal loopholes. For example, the biblical ritual for a wife suspected of adultery, the sotah, was just abolished. The reason given? That there were simply too many adulterers. He also points to the law about being liable if you dig an open pit. He claims this was nullified by adding a specific depth requirement, using what he calls an illogical excuse about the air of the pit only being harmful at that specific depth. So, after laying out all of this evidence, from the calendar all the way down to these everyday rituals, what is the final takeaway? Well, the author brings it all back to something very, very personal. And here it is in his own words. He's not asking for you to just blindly believe him. Actually, he expects that you won't. His whole point isn't to convince you, but to get you to look into it for yourself. He argues that the only way to really understand is for each person to go and do their own investigation of the sources. So where does this all leave us? We've just walked through a pretty challenging and complex theory that questions some really fundamental ideas of religious observance. For anyone who does want to dig deeper, the author has made more of his research available. But in the end, the question is still there. Is this a bold theory, maybe even a baseless one, or a hidden truth? As the author himself suggests, that investigation is now in your hands.